A lot of the time when I start a new anime, the first episode doesn't make a huge impression on me. I mean, I can tell if there are characters that might be interesting or if it's a story with an intriguing premise, but I'm not really invested in the episode. Even if it's an anime that ends up being one of my favorite of all time as I keep watching, I usually need to get a few episodes in before I can get properly hooked. But when I finish a story that is just absolute peak, 10 out of 10, at some point I want to rewatch it. And when I put on that first episode again, it hits like a train. It feels like someone ripped my ball sack off and deep fried it because I now know what the author was cooking. I fully know these characters now. I know why they're acting the way they do here, and I know what that will lead them to go through in the future. It's a completely different experience from the first time I went through the story, because what I didn't realize at the time was that it was showing me what the whole story was really about. And there's one story in particular where the more it goes on and the longer it gets, the more impactful its first chapter becomes for me, which is One Piece. As you know, One Piece is long as fuck. There's like 50 quadrillion chapters or something with so many banging arcs, moments, and characters. But still, after all of those, the very first chapter is still one of my favorites, if not my number one. The reason for that is pretty simple. It perfectly embodies everything that I love about One Piece. And the key ingredient to making not just this chapter work, but what makes the whole story of One Piece work is Shanks. We obviously get introduced to the One Piece itself in this first chapter. It's this huge setup that to this day has not been paid off. We're gonna be in 2030 and we're still not gonna know what it is. Everyone wants to know what the One Piece is. The hype and excitement for it has been building for decades now, and I wanna know too, like, what was bro laughing at? What was so funny? But what I wanna see even more than that, which was also set up in this first chapter, is Luffy giving Shanks his hat back. To me, that is the biggest emotional moment One Piece still has left for me. I care more about that than I do people in my real life, which is crazy to say because Shanks is basically not in the story at all. After this, he completely disappears from the story and doesn't show up for hundreds of chapters at a time. And when he does pop back into the story for a few pages, the only thing he does is spew some mysterious bullshit and then he despawns again. But still, he managed to make such a big impact on me in this first chapter alone, and the reason for that is because of how much impact he had on Luffy. The way Shanks deals with the mountain bandits truly has Luffy in awe. Shanks allows himself to be disrespected and humiliated, making him look like the biggest fraud of all time, but it's fine. They're just some low-life bandits that don't mean anything. Them doing that to him is so inconsequential. But as soon as it involves people Shanks cares about, he draws a firm line. どんな理由があろうと、俺は友達を傷つける奴は許さない! Shanks, and particularly this interaction, is what makes Luffy the person who he is, and you see this throughout the whole story. He doesn't beat Don Krieg because he wants to prove himself as the better pirate, but instead because Krieg threatened Sanji and Seth to dream. He doesn't declare war against the government because he has some grand political ideology, but simply because of the way they're treating a person he deeply cares about. And once you see this pattern, this scene from the Jaya arc becomes the clearest example of all, as it intentionally mirrors what happens with Shanks in chapter 1. It plays out literally identical. Luffy gets attacked and made fun of in a bar by Bellamy, but refuses to engage or fight back. Bellamy's mindset is so beneath Luffy that he's not worth it. Engaging with him would just mean stooping down to his level. Nothing he could say could make Luffy less interested or passionate about the Sky Island and his future dreams. But again, as soon as he learns Bellamy has stolen Cricket's treasure, he doesn't hold back at all. And this is why the first chapter is so incredibly effective for me, because constantly throughout the story after this, when I see Luffy make decisions, I see Shanks. His presence echoes throughout the entire story without even being present himself. And just so I don't sound like a schizo One Piece fan where I see two panels of a guy blinking and call it god tier foreshadowing, Oda is still writing Shanks with that same character trait in the current material. Like the scene with Kid, where he lets Kid chill for a while well, but as soon as he attacks Shanks' allies, bro gets completely curb stomped and obliterated. So we see that Oda is still utilizing this character trait for these two characters purposefully. But not only that though, as we progress further into the story, he gives it a new meaning. I think this lesson Luffy learned from Shanks in chapter 1 gets revealed to be something even deeper, something that really cuts to the core of his character, which is freedom. Luffy, of course, wants to be the most free person in the world by becoming the Pirate King. But being free does not just mean being able to do whatever you want. It also means being in control of yourself. Bellamy wants Luffy to fight back. He wants to provoke him into defending his pride and proving that his dream matters. And if Luffy takes the bait, then Bellamy has successfully decided how Luffy acts. But by staying silent, allowing this to happen to him, he isn't controlled by his pride like how Bellamy and Kid is, who are constantly trying to prove themselves to the world. Whereas Shanks and Luffy are already confident in who they are. In other words, they are free. When Shanks says, "Promise me that you'll give it back to me someday when you become a great pirate," that hits so much harder the second and third time around because I know he becomes a great pirate. I've seen it. And the person who set his entire journey in motion and shaped him into the Luffy we know today was Shanks.
この帽子をお前に預ける。いつかきっと返しに来い。立派な海賊になってな。力がなくとも成り立つとはとてもじゃないが口にできないね。
Despite me not being particularly fond of how much My Hero Academia's writing quality fell off, I used to be this show's #1 glazer, and I do still think that the first 3 seasons are peak, and I especially think that the first 2 episodes are one of the best starts to a story I have ever seen.
It was perfect.
I mean, I feel like everyone loves these first 2 episodes. Even people that don't like My Hero still think this is a great start, and I also loved it the first time I watched it. But after finishing My Hero Academia, watching it again all these years later, what used to be my favorite moment in these first 2 episodes is no longer the same. You see, throughout the whole story of My Hero Academia, it deals with a certain question, which is, what does it mean to be a hero? And the first time we see heroes in the story is when they defeat some goofy-ass villain, and it's this epic moment that Deku is just in awe of. Everyone loves them because of how awesome their powers are, but really, these guys are absolute bums. Or like, maybe not, but they are clearly supposed to show us how flawed the hero society is. The heroes are so motivated by fame and getting more popular by looking cool while defeating villains that they end up prioritizing that more than actually saving people. When they see a villain they know they could beat easily and increase their rankings, they go for it. But what happens when they're not certain they can win? Well, just look at them here. Look at how useless they are all when Bakugo's in trouble. They're all waiting for the person with the right quirk to step in because, oh, it's too dangerous. Like, what type of bitch shit is that? Imagine getting raw dogged by this sludge monster and like 20 pro heroes are looking at you like this. And framing the heroes and hero system in this flawed way is the perfect way to highlight why Deku is the only true hero. Him stepping in to try and rescue Bakugo simply because he needed saving is such a well-written moment, and when I first watched this episode 10 years ago, that was my favorite part of this scene. Seeing this kid act so heroically when no one else does, even though he has no superpowers, I mean, you can't help but root for this guy. But when I rewatched this episode all these years later, having seen the whole story and the full context, there's another moment in this scene I like significantly more. Because in this scene, already in the beginning of the story, My Hero answers its central question: what does it mean to be a hero? It shows it right to us. But because we've only seen the beginning, the answer is hidden in plain sight. The obvious answer is that Deku is a true hero because he runs in when nobody else does, regardless of having a quirk or not. But the closer we get to the end of the story, we realize that that isn't the real answer. Because while Deku does act like a hero in this moment, he doesn't save Bakugo. All Might does, even though it's a hero's job to save people. You see, being a true hero doesn't necessarily mean just rushing in recklessly in every situation. I mean, if I saw Superman outside my window fighting some fat ass alien, I'm staying the fuck inside, okay? I'm hiding. If I'm living in a world full of freak-ass superheroes, I'm not gonna try to help because I can't. So of course I'll let them handle it, that's their job. But when I get so used to other people handling things for me, what happens when there's a situation I can help out with and I don't help? If I ignore the classmate who genuinely seems like he could be going down the wrong path, or ignoring the guy on the street that's getting picked on, I'm helping to create the monsters the heroes will eventually have to defeat. In other words, the system that's creating the solution is also the system that's creating the problem. And even Deku himself becomes a part of this problem in the Vigilante arc, trying to do 100% of the hero work himself, not allowing anyone else to help. Yes, his intentions are selfless, unlike the heroes that stood watching Bakugo get slurped, but he is basically recreating the exact same system that already failed. And funnily enough, Bakugo himself is the one that makes Deku realize how bad of an idea this is, and if they want to stop the villains, everyone needs to chip in, which is exactly what they end up doing. In the final battle, everyone helps to defeat All For One, but the important thing to note here is that everyone is basically finished from all the action. No one can go on anymore, but they still all show up because of Deku. Even the guy that stood idly by watching Bakugo shows up to help here. Seeing how Deku is completely desperate, broken, and barely standing is what makes people want to help him even more. And this is what separates him from All Might, who desperately hid away his weakness, only wanting people to feel safe and that he had everything under control, even when he didn't. But when Deku exposes his weakness, people see just how much help he needs, and instead of making them lose hope, it makes them want to stand up with him. And so, the greatest hero isn't the one who's most famous or the one who beats the most villains. It's the one who inspires others to be a hero themselves. And so, going back to the first episodes, watching it again now, my new favorite moment is this. All Might is fucking pathetic, and that is so cool. Later in the story, it's revealed to us that All Might had been struggling to find a successor for a really long time. Because of the way hero society had evolved, All Might was only surrounded by heroes like these that wouldn't fully commit, to the point that he probably didn't even know what he was looking for anymore. Not just that, but All Might himself, the greatest hero in the world, had forgotten what it means to truly be a hero. And so when he finally sees a real hero with his own eyes, he remembers that in this moment, it doesn't matter that he has no power left in the day, or that his weakness might get exposed, because there is someone that needs saving.
君はヒーローになれる。
これは僕が最高のヒーローになるまでの物語だ。
お前に敵などいない。誰にも敵などいないんだ。
Like the One Piece anime, Vinland Saga also starts differently from the manga. You see, in the manga, the story starts with this guy. Look at the top of his head! Yeah, that's the dude from episode 7 of the anime. Instead, the anime opens with an anime original scene of Thor's leaving a battlefield that was not in the manga. But unlike One Piece, I actually think changing it this way ends up working better than the manga. You see, the start of the manga is very similar to the way the Berserk manga starts. An edgy-ass warrior with a dark past that desperately wants revenge against a certain person, followed by a long flashback arc where we see how they ended up that way. But I think Berserk's way of using this framing is more effective because we have absolutely no idea what will happen to Guts, and no one in their wildest dreams could have predicted what would happen at the end of that arc, and so you're reading while trying to piece together and predict how it's going to unfold. But with Vinland Saga, Thorfinn clearly states that Askeladd killed Thors, and in the flashback we watch exactly that, and so it's not quite as tragic when we already know exactly how and what will happen. The manga starts by showing us the version of Thorfinn created by revenge, but the anime starts by showing us the person Thorfinn eventually becomes mature enough to understand, and that I think is the key to making the first episode of the Vinland Saga anime a perfect first episode. And the anime original scene serves a very important job, which it accomplished while basically having no dialogue. Thors is daydreaming about Vinland, a place of freedom, then abruptly cuts to this absolutely insane Viking battle, and Thors is just that guy. He is bodying everyone. Now, wait a minute! Like, this dude is a beast, holy shit, man. But even though he's so strong and powerful and good at what he does, he still chooses to walk away. Which is what makes this whole scene so relevant, because it's meant to show us what he walked away from, whereas the whole rest of the episode serves to show us what he walked towards instead. His own life philosophy, morals, and the world that he wants to live in. And there is one scene in particular where I not only think this gets perfectly highlighted, but also embodies the core of Vinland Saga's story as a whole.
遥かな西、海の向こうにヴィンランドという名の土地がある。
While Vinland may be a real place, in this scene, Vinland is hope. The slave might not live to see it, but he dies knowing that far to the west, somewhere out there, people can one day not have to live in the same horrible way he did. Not because they hide away and isolate themselves in some random remote land, not because they have escaped humanity, but because humanity itself has become capable of living in peace. Humans can respect one another and actively seek understanding, while trying to avoid conflict at all costs. And I think that the rest of this episode is constructed in a way to make us feel what Vinland is, because Thors' village is basically his own version of it. It's not literally Vinland, but it's peaceful. Everything from its beautiful presentation to seeing Thorfinn's daily life of mundane chores, or the absolutely banging music. Like, legit, the composer behind the soundtrack for Vinland Saga put straight up crack in the audio for these songs, man. There are so many of these ambient piano songs that are just beautiful. And when you pair that with these incredible landscape illustrations, you really get this deep sense of peace and introspection. Now, it's not always peaceful. Like, this dude pulls up and he is on absolute smoke. But even then, Thor shows that unlike how he was bodying all those sorry-ass Vikings in the beginning of the episode, real strength is in the person who's willing to walk away, compromise, and meet cruelty with kindness. And all of this is what Thors ultimately fails to teach Thorfinn. Back when season 1 of the show aired, a common criticism was that watching Thorfinn constantly seek revenge kinda sucked ass, because it was so obvious where his character would end up, and how he would eventually realize revenge is not the way. So instead of asking what would happen to Thorfinn, they were just wondering when it would happen. Thors had already taught the audience the lesson, so seeing Thorfinn proceed to do the exact opposite can be a bit frustrating. I don't have an issue with this personally, but of course this is a fair criticism to have. Now, I hate to be the guy that says that's the point, because I do think that's kind of like the worst defense for criticism ever, but this criticism is basically the same thing that happens in every story. When you watch Naruto or One Piece, you obviously know they will become the Hokage or find the One Piece at the end. No one was thinking Naruto would actually die before that happens. But still, we watch because we want to see how it happens. So Thorfinn's journey here is a lot less about what he will realize and more about what it will take to realize it. And when he finally does, it is the most satisfying experience to watch ever. Thorfinn realizes that his dad was spitting straight facts this whole time, and the first episode gets more and more validated and meaningful, and eventually all of his actions are defined by his father's own words and actions in the first episode. Just like how Thorfinn didn't fully understand what Thors meant when he was a kid, I didn't either when I watched the first episode. I mean, I understood it on a surface level, sure, like I have no enemies, that sounds like a deep Pinterest quote or some shit, but I didn't truly understand the meaning in this context. Coming back to this episode for a second time though, after having seen season 2, it hits so much harder because I can truly see the full scope of what he was saying, and the scene with the slave perfectly encapsulates it. And while Thorfinn might not be on board yet, I know that eventually, a bunch of episodes later, he will end up back at the answer given to him in the beginning.
遥かの西、大海の向こうにヴィンランドという名の土地がある。そこは暖かく、そこならきっとあなたも苦しまずに生きていける。俺たちと一緒にそこへ行こう。
These three are without a doubt among my favorite beginnings in anime/manga. They truly could not be better, and if you want to see what my favorite character dynamic in anime or just stories in general is, make sure to check out this video right here.